and a warm welcome to this edition of Economic Forum, where we talk about economic-related matters. And on a very interesting note, we've invited into the studio the Honourable Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development, Professor Murwira, to help us take us through the paces and the recent developments in his ministry. Welcome to Economic Forum.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You often have been quoted as saying that Africa has the tragedy of reading the wrong manual. Can you run us through the paces?
Africa is a continent that has been traumatized for so long. We have got more than 500 years of trauma, which basically means we started with slavery, we went to colonization, and then what we call neo-colonial practices. And this has made us sometimes get stripped of things that we should be able to survive on. I want to just give an example of different things to do with technology and also to do with agriculture. To do with agriculture, one of the issues that we are having is that at this moment, we are growing crops that do not necessarily have to grow in Africa. For example, maize. We are having a lot of problems of hunger because we are growing maize in place of the crops that were created for this region ecologically. For example, rapoko. For example, millet. For example, sorghum. Kuvira mapfunde, munga, zio, the nyemba. Sometimes they call them cowpeas. They are not cowpeas. They are our beans. And also nzungu and so forth, which are groundnuts. So what we are saying is that if we keep on using a certain crop that we know for sure is so susceptible to drought, I think that's reading the wrong manual. I want to say, for example, last year, His Excellency the President, Dr. Idi Mnangagwa, said, for the first time in 2020, 1.6 million hectares of arable land in Zimbabwe should be put under the traditional grains. And some people continue calling them small grains. No, they are not small grains. Wheat is small as well. So why are ours called small grains? So the small is not to do with the size of the grain. It's to do with significance. It's almost like telling a person that you're a kefir. And then the person happily says, I'm a kefir. So our crops are not small grains. Our crops are actually traditional grains. Rapoko, sorghum, and millet. You see, when you say small grains, you are already reading the wrong manual. Because surely they are not small grains. These are crops that will survive. You know, when sorghum, when it rains, and all of a sudden there is no rain, let's say for 2 weeks, they appear as if they are dry. When the rain comes, they will just start growing again. So this one is also very important to know that we had been stripped of our heritage. And for some reason, we try to reinforce that stripping. So that stripping has to end at some point. So that's what I call by focusing on wrong things and trying to solve the other, it cannot work. So on the technology bit, when you look at Zimbabwe, for example, and you look at how sophisticated our systems were before colonization, we are looking at systems that were able to build Kame, that were able to build Nandare Nalatale, that were able to build Namombe or Orogoko ruins, that were able to build Great Zimbabwe itself, that were able to build Tsindi. Surely this is prowess in engineering. And this has withstood time, more than 10 centuries without mortar. It's still standing. This country invented Mbira, for example. It's one of the most sophisticated instruments ever invented. Maybe the piano came from the Mbira. I don't know which one started. But even if they started simultaneously, it means that people here were thinking very hard technologically. We were very advanced in iron smelting. We were very advanced in gold processing for centuries. We were very advanced in copper, mangura processing. So all these are technological heritages where if the children of this country then begin to say, we actually have to look up to someone on how to process iron when we've been doing it for so many years, that's a sign of dislodgement. And normally when you are taught by another person, remember, there is no colonial master who will teach you in a way that is equal or surpass them. There's no way. So you are likely to read the wrong manual all the time. And if you trust that, you are likely to go astray, and you are likely not to pull your people out of poverty.
Just going forward, Honorable, just to inculcate and to also bring the right manual into the system, how should we go about that?
To bring the right manual is first of all to know who you are, right? Because we can't be people in the world, we can't contribute positively if we don't have confidence in ourselves. Because the world does not like beggars, the world likes contributors. So normally, that confidence that people must have, that confidence, the buck stops with education, and real education for that matter. When we talk about real education, we mean education that produces goods and services. We mean education that has a purpose and a benefit. We mean education that trains people to produce industry, not education that trains people to work for someone outside of our system. So that's how we can correct this, to make sure that we give our people a heritage-based education, an education that tells them that, it's not only about teaching, it's not only about research, it's not only about community service, it's also about innovation, it's also about industrialization. Education is education when it improves people's lives, when it meets people's basic needs, but not when people who get out of a system are actually needing help. Then that's a problem.
Honorable, I will have to hold your thoughts there. We'll pick it up in the second segment. We will take a short break now, but do join us after this break for more Economic Forum. We're now in the second segment of Economic Forum, a platform where we discuss economic-related matters, and I'm happy to say that we've got the Minister, the Honourable Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development, Professor Murwira. Just before the break, it was getting a bit heated in here. We were taught how to run the system and taught how to create the system. 17 million people looking for jobs.
Yeah.
Can you run us through that pace?
It's a design problem. When we say it's a design problem, we are basically saying, during the colonial era, Britain was using its colonies as an economic system. And what that means is that the thinking and the setup of things was being done in the metropole, which means in the mother country. And in the colony, you had to produce the workers for that industry. So the workers didn't need to think about design. They just needed to think about going to work and get instructed. So the education system that was introduced in the colonies was Education 3.0, which is education which teaches, researches, and community service, which makes people be able to run the industry, but not necessarily understand where it is coming from. I just want to pose this rhetorical question, which says, do you ever think we were being given British education? I don't think so. If we were given British education, we should have been able to be advanced in aeronautical engineering. We should have been able to make a Rolls-Royce. We should have been able to make submarines. We should have been able to make a Jaguar. We should have been able to make so many sophisticated things that the British education system was able to make. Why was it not being made in Zimbabwe? It means the education system in the UK was different from the education system here. The issue basically is that the design was such that we were designed to work in an industry, for example, a steel industry, that would have been thought about in the UK, and people had to have workers in here. So they had to be good at English a bit of engineering, just to understand what is going on, and so forth. So when we are looking at that, you can really tell that our education was education 3.0, and it was meant to create a worker, and it did exactly that. But if you want to use that education in post-independence and try to make it empower people for post-independence, that will be expecting water out of granite. In actual fact, it's trying to use an axe to drive a nail, or trying to use a hammer to cut a tree. So it's a design problem. So it means post-independence, what we had to do now is to make sure that our education has got two additional points, which are innovation and industrialization, to liberate the good people. Because in Zimbabwe, we have got very intelligent people, but people can work as much as you have given them the terms of reference. If the terms of reference are limited, they'll work on the limited terms of reference. But now that we have worked on all full terms of reference, which says think and industrialize, you will see that we have released a lot of energy in our people. So it's a framework problem. It's a design problem, which makes people look for a job when in actual fact, this country is importing food, this country is importing medicine. It shows you that there's a lot to do in this country. And a lot to do when it's met with ability, it creates jobs. So there are plenty of potential jobs in this country. They just need correct frameworks to be set, which is exactly what we have done under the government of His Excellency, the President, Dr. Idi Mnangagwa.
Honourable Minister, just to bring a bit of light into what we're discussing here today, perhaps I feel it is important that we find out what the aim of the higher and tertiary education system is.
The purpose of higher and tertiary education is to meet Zimbabwe's basic human needs that include food, that include shelter, that include health, that include water, that include sleep, that include innovation, that include connection. When we talk about a syllabus and it's outside of these things, that's how we classify that education is useless, if it is.
Well, let me just take you back to the system. Perhaps I should ask you, why did it take so long for the university to change the curriculum that was implemented in 1974, only to be changed a few years back?
I want to say that, to me, they normally say puppies don't see on the same day. What it means is zvimbwanana zvisunurirani the same day. But to me, it doesn't matter when you realize, right? It's not about when you realize, because we don't want to get into the regret mode. The most important thing is to realize, and there is no wrong time to do the right thing. In other words, there's no wrong time to do the right thing. I wouldn't want to start blaming, because from 1980 to 2017, we made major strides in literacy. And Zimbabwe's literacy rate is almost 100% now, which is the highest in Africa. What we are talking about is not being desperate. It's actually accumulating from the advantage that we already have. The advantage that we already have is literacy. And now we are moving on to add innovation and industrialization to make sure that we actually realize that industries don't fall from the sky. Industries come from the brain. And in this context, I want to say, yes, it might have taken long, but Zimbabwe will even live longer. So in terms of Zimbabwe's history and where it will go, 40 years is nothing. Zimbabwe will go on, and will go on for a very long time after us. So it's important to start, and we start now. T is equals to 0. There we start.
Honourable Minister, just before we cap it off in this segment, you've been quoted as saying education is about concepts and not about languages. Can you explain to us what you meant by that?
Yes, actual fact, everything is about concepts. Education is about concepts. You know, when people make an aeroplane or a car in Japan, they make a car based on the laws of motion and gears, right? And they'll be speaking Japanese when they are making that car. In China, same thing.
I'll allow you to tell us in greater detail in the third and final segment, but we do take another break, but do stay tuned. More Economic Forum coming up after the break. Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. You are watching Economic Forum, and just before the break we were discussing with the Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development, Professor Murwira. We were discussing issues to do with education, about concepts and not about languages, and he was taking us through the paces.
Yes. A simple example of because engineering itself, it has been done by many civilizations while they were speaking their languages. The Maya civilization in South America, the Zimbabwe civilization, as you know, we have a civilization, it's a well-defined Zimbabwe civilization here, and also the Egyptian civilization. And coming to the modern world, you can see that the Chinese are making fantastic technology. But they are not speaking in English while they are doing so. They are doing it in Chinese because gravity won't change its speed 9.8 meters per second because of language. It's a physical concept. And Russians, they are doing their things in their own language. Portuguese are doing. So language is a medium of communication, but it's not science itself. So because we were under colonial education, there is a time that we have to transition. I predict that Zimbabwe in the next 100 years will be doing its science in its own language. What are the steps that we have taken? For example, we have started a National Language Institute at the Midland State University. This National Language Institute has already translated the Zimbabwe's constitution into all 16 dialects which are spoken in Zimbabwe. We expect that work to continue in different subjects so that people begin to see, as I said at the beginning, people are stripped of their heritage very easily. And some people begin to be actually vanguards of foreign heritage, forgetting their own heritage. When you forget your own heritage, you are very weak because you are always looking for the latest from the master. So you are following. Sometimes people, when they say, we are being left behind, I always ask a question. Do you know where the person you are following, where they are going? So you cannot always use the word, we are being left behind. The issue is, language is a medium of communication, while science is a universal language. So science can be done and communicated in any language. That's why in Arabic, they are doing their things. In Italy, they are doing their things. And so forth. Actually, they need a translator for them to explain the same thing that an English person or a Russian person will be talking about. But they will still be talking about the same bottle and the same polymer science, but using different languages, but the concept of making a bottle is the same. So it tells you that we should not have this obsession with other people's languages. While it is important to access the international community, it should not be confused for science and technology.
Honourable Minister, just going forward, let's take a look at some of the realities on the ground, where workers, in some industries have continuously complained about the welfare, the low wages, the poor working conditions, remuneration, vis-a-vis tuition fees. What is the position of government at the moment?
The issue with our country, nationally speaking, is productivity. We have to ramp up productivity as a nation. We cannot be tinkering with the figures of money. Figures of money are a reflection of the productivity. So the issue now is sustaining our systems. We have to be able to sustain our systems. And the important system to be sustained, for example, is higher and tertiary education. In higher and tertiary education, what we have done, the movement that we have done in the past 2 years, was to make sure that we made a move to make sure that students don't pay full fees during attachment. They pay 60%, boom, in order to do that. The next thing is that this year, for the first time, government is giving university operations money, which was stopped sometime before 2009. Since 2009, for the first time, government is giving universities operations money, which is at least 6 million for established universities, 8 to 10 million for new universities. This is to make sure that the universities won't be tempted to raise fees more than how they should raise. This is a way of dampening the fees. And on the other hand, For the first time since about the late 90s, we have reintroduced the government-backed student loan scheme, which makes it possible for students to be able to borrow money for their education. That's what I did myself. And I think that's what most people did when they were going to university. So this facility was not there before. But what we have also done is to make sure that the universities move towards industrialization so that they don't solely rely on student fees for their operations. For example, I have an example of the University of Zimbabwe, for example, that ramped up their production at their farm to about 7 tons per hectare of maize. And they were able to provide, and they've got a milling plant that was able to provide their students with the needed milling mill that dampened the price of accommodation, for example, using that. So we are also encouraging universities, and the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, after we approached him to give each university and college a farm, he actually effected that by writing a letter to all provincial ministers to make sure that each college, each university has a farm, so that we begin in the medium to long term, be able to be productive, so that we don't ask so much out of the students, but we ask so much in terms of money, we ask so much out of their brains. That's what we are moving towards. So I hope this gives you an overview of the direction in which we are moving. And also just to add that in this drive, for example, Chinua University of Technology, they now have a potential revenue due to the artificial insemination program of $140 million US annually. If this kicks off and they are able to export, do you think they will ask so much from students? No. In actual fact, they will be competing for the most intelligent student so that they give them a scholarship. That's what happens in a nation that focuses on production. So going full circle, it's about production. It is about making our universities doing whatever they have to do to produce, but government has made moves to make sure that we keep our students, we cushion our students from any rise in fees.
Perhaps going forward, I'd want to find out what you are doing as government to engage with the private sector, because the private sector is really the mainstream in terms of your income, in terms of the base, of the financial base.
That's correct.
Do you have any programs that you've undertaken at the moment?
In actual fact, our innovation hubs are the meeting place between government, universities, and private sector. We want to innovate together so that we ramp up production in this country. Because that's the main issue.
Is that working?
You know, yes, it's working. You know what, whenever you see people quarreling in a house, there's little food. So is the solution to push one away from the food? No. The solution is to produce more. So our education is an instrument for production. That's why we are saying, for a long time we were reading a wrong manual, which was taking education as something like a hobby. Education isn't a hobby, it's not a hobby. It's a serious business, which is meant for the modernization and industrialization of any country, which is meant for ramping up production in any country.
Honorable Minister, I must thank you once again for coming to Economic Forum.
Thank you very much.
That was the Honorable Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development, Professor Murwira, taking us through the paces and the recent developments in his ministry. Well, until next week, it was a pleasure having you on Economic Forum. From myself, Jerome Perez, and the entire production team, good night.